Hope that you can hear me okay. I had a last minute change of location. I'm in a very high traffic area this morning. So if you hear some yelling and screaming and some dogs barking, that will be why. But hopefully this will go smoothly. I know that it's been a while since I've seen you. We've tried to space these out so that we could time these briefings with things that would be of interest to obviously the media, but of course to the public as well. So we do have a few updates for you. And as always, we appreciate your feedback and any information or feedback that you can give us to help us make this go more smoothly. I'll begin by talking about the census. The census is amongst what we're dealing with COVID-19, ranks amongst the most important matters that we're facing right now. The Trump administration had initially extended the time for people to respond to the census and for feedback to be given to Congress. They have now shaved off an entire month of that time, in addition to no longer offering an extension on when information will be relayed to Congress. This is problematic for many reasons. We obviously know that there are fires out west, and with Hurricane Sally making shore in Alabama this morning, and the flooding and the damage that's expected from that throughout the Southeast, it is making it even less likely that we will be able to hit the mark with census. And so while we continue to offer our thoughts and our prayers, and we'll provide whatever support is necessary to help our neighbors during this time, we also want to be mindful that census money is important for communities, especially as we see communities that will need to rebuild. It's important because it helps determine the amount of infrastructure money that comes into our communities. It determines what funding we get for our schools. It determines our representation in Congress and so much more. And this is only done every 10 years. And so there is a bipartisan effort underway to extend the census, and we are calling upon our representatives in Congress to join that effort to extend the census. Right now, I've been told we have roughly a 57.7% response rate in Atlanta. Normally, we will be able to send people door to door to get responses from people who perhaps have not responded. But obviously, with COVID-19, it has become increasingly difficult to do that. So we are asking people to please respond to the census. Please make sure that your household is counted. The last time that we did this press conference, I was asked had I responded to the census. I had not at that time, but I have since then. And there are 6 people in my household. It only took me 15 minutes, and that included me not having in front of me the information on how to log on. So from start to finish, in going into the website and inputting my information with 6 people. And I also had a little fire on my desk with a candle and some paperwork. So 15 minutes, including a small fire on my desk to fill out my census. So it doesn't take long. We just ask that you go ahead and do that. And you will also begin to, if you are in a low track response area, you are going to get text messages. You will continue to receive robocalls, and you're going to see a bus coming through your community. When you see that bus, that means that your community is not where it needs to be in its response rate. But we're going to be offering some haircuts and some other things to get people to come out and respond to the census. And we obviously will do it keeping all precautions in mind as it relates to COVID-19. So if you see that bus, that means that your neighborhood is not where it should be. Your community is not where it should be. And we ask that you right now assume that there's going to be a September 30th deadline to fill out the census. If you have access to internet service, you can go to 2020census.gov to fill that out. There's also a few important elections coming up. There is a special election September 29th to fill the seat temporarily, at least for Congressman John Lewis's seat. But we are also 48 days away from a historic election on November 3rd, the presidential election. I recently issued executive and administrative orders to help ensure that Atlanta residents and city employees are able to cast their vote in an easier way, regardless of party affiliation. So what we've done is we have extended the time that city employees are able to take leave to cast their votes. This has been extended into the early voting period, so they can take up to 4 hours of leave during early voting on election day and also during the runoff to extend their voting. We're also working with Fulton and DeKalb registration boards to identify how the city can assist through resources and facilities to ensure that all eligible voters have an opportunity to safely vote. I'm encouraging everyone, if you are able to early vote early. The last election, I was able to cast my vote at State Farm Arena. Thank you to the Atlanta Hawks and the Atlanta Fulton County Recreation Authority for making State Farm available. It was very simple to do, and it was very spacious. I felt very comfortable casting my vote there. In fact, I took my mother along with me and 2 of my kids to join me in casting that vote. There's also going to be additional information on our 311 mobile app. It will be updated with voter registration information. There will be an important community land trust referendum on this ballot, in addition to the high-profile races, the presidential race. This referendum will allow a new homestead exemption for homeowners whose homes are located on land owned by a qualified nonprofit known as a community land trust. A community land trust are one of the few models that preserve long-term affordability for low and moderate income homeowners. So we ask your support of that referendum. This creates a new $30,000 exemption that will make home ownership possible for more low and moderate income families by reducing overall costs associated with home ownership, especially in neighborhoods where property values are rising. And we know that's happening throughout the city of Atlanta. On to phase 2 of our reopening plan as it relates to COVID-19. Very happy that we were able to move back to phase 2. As many of you all remember, we were in phase 2 previously, but when our numbers began to spike, we had to go back to phase 1. That was based on the data and metrics that we put in place through our advisory board that was comprised of healthcare professionals, representatives of businesses, big and small throughout the city. And I, again, thank the leaders of that commission. It was led by our COO, Joshua Williams, along with Ingrid Saunders-Jones and Robbie Ash. And it has given us a solid set of metrics that you can look at atlstrong.org to get more information on that. The phase 2 guidelines call for residents to continue practicing social distancing, limiting gatherings to 10 people or less, and continuing to wear face masks, which of course is required by city ordinance. And also, if we continue to move in this direction by September 24th, we will move on to phase 3 of the reopening guidelines. So we are hopeful that our numbers will continue to go in the right direction. But I just want to remind people that COVID is still deadly. And what I have been told by Dr. Carlos Del Rio from Emory University, who I can't thank enough for his input and his guidance to the city of Atlanta. But what he has shared is right now we are seeing a spike in COVID numbers in Hispanic communities, but African Americans are still dying at a higher rate. So please be mindful of spreading COVID-19. You all know the story of my household having an asymptomatic child in the house who gave it to my husband and I. And my husband, I think, would officially be considered a long hauler at this point because he's still dealing with a number of after effects of COVID-19. And this is someone who went into COVID in perfectly good health. Also, I've reissued a number of executive and administrative orders, including suspending water termination due to non-payment right now, suspension of towing and booting in the city right away, and refraining from imposing penalties on unpaid business taxes that were due on April 1st, but we still ask you to pay those business taxes, but penalties will not be imposed. These orders will be extended through October 31st. We are also extending the $500 per month hazard pay through December 31st to our public safety, watershed, public works, parks and recreation employees, and all of our frontline essential employees who are continuing to show up each and every day to make sure that the city is functioning as it should. And this is more than half of our workforce that's continuing to show up and has done so throughout COVID. Emergency rental assistance. We recently launched an emergency rental assistance program, which provides $22 million through the Coronavirus Relief Fund to help keep renters in their homes. This program is administered by the United Way of Greater Atlanta and will provide rental, utility, or security deposit assistance to more than 6,700 residents in the city of Atlanta who are eligible. Renters who have experienced a loss of income due to the pandemic can visit unitedwayatlanta.org to apply for up to $3,000 in assistance per household. And with that, I am going to change my screen and I am going to open up for questions. So if you can give me a moment to go into my screen so that I hopefully can see you. All right. With that, I'll take any questions that you may have, and we also have senior members on our of our staff who are joining us this morning in case there's something that I am unable to respond to. And I see we have 30 participants this morning. Not sure how many are staff or media, but I think that may be a record number. So I'm glad to see so many people have joined us this morning.
Good morning. If you have a question, please be sure to raise your hand. First up is Jeremy.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Mayor. I just unmuted my screen here. So you mentioned it earlier, the response rate, the self-response rate that is for Atlanta is now just under 58%. It was 59% for all of 2010. Can you talk to us a little bit about what Atlanta is doing to improve the self-response rate for the 2020 census? And then I'd like to hear you weigh in on the legal battle that is being waged between the Trump administration and the advocacy groups, the National Urban League and others, to extend the amount of time the Trump administration is taking to do on the street, door-to-door counting. As you know, and you mentioned earlier, they're looking to cut that timetable by about a month, the Trump administration is, and the advocacy groups are arguing that that could result in an undercount and are now suing in court to block that plan. So again, what's Atlanta doing to improve its rate? And what is Atlanta's position on the legal battle over cutting the timetable for the door-to-door count?
Well, thank you, Jeremy. And what outlet are you with, Jeremy?
I'm sorry, Mayor, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Jeremy Redmond.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. What I'll begin with is the response rate. You're absolutely right that we are close to the number that we had in all of 2010, which really speaks to the hard work that's being pushed out by our census group. And this is especially significant because they've been doing it under COVID. They can't get into senior high rises and many other places that they would normally go into, and they aren't knocking on doors in communities. So they are just doing some old-fashioned hustling, getting out, catching people where they can, and asking them to please fill out the census form. They have iPads and give the iPads to people and allow people to fill the census out on the spot, which is significant because what they're finding is that people want to respond. They just haven't taken the time to do so. And I just have to mention the foresight of the Reid administration in putting forth legislation that allowed us to have some funding in place to be able to shore up our census operations. So that's been a significant help. We're also trying to get some outside resources to help with some of the expenses because we're having to do it in a very, very different way. I also chair the U.S. Conference of Mayors Subcommittee on the Census, and I know that this is something that cities across the country are challenged with. We've got a very nice, friendly competition going on with many cities, but we are pretty much all aligned on the fact that it needs to be extended. And so as it relates to the lawsuit, I personally and the city supports that lawsuit because what will happen is we historically see an undercount in communities of color, in communities that quite often need the resources in a significant way. Those are the communities that are often undercounted. So going into the census, even before COVID, we knew that it was going to be a challenge. But it is really inexplicable that the Trump administration would take the opportunity to shave off time after the president himself said that it was a no-brainer that we needed to extend the time. So given that we're in the midst of a pandemic, given the natural disasters that we are facing, it really is inexplicable that we wouldn't take as much time that we need to get these numbers. But if my personal opinion is that this is a political play because it does speak to representation in Congress. And the higher the numbers are, especially in urban communities, the more representation that we have in Congress. And that's certainly not something that the Trump administration, I'm sure, is supportive of. So I believe, my personal opinion is that politics are at play, and it really is a disregard for the Constitution of the United States, which makes it very clear that we are to get an accurate count. And if you remember, this began with attempting to put the citizenship question on the census. The Constitution doesn't speak to your citizenship. It says that every person is to be counted. And that's what we're going to keep pushing to do in Atlanta. So we've also had to overcome that hurdle as well, because many communities, immigrant communities, have been frightened and are afraid to respond to the census because of the push, because of the citizenship question that was pushed out by the Trump administration. But that being said, we're still on track to do better than we did in 2010, and I'm hoping that we're going to do significantly better than we did in 2010.
Thank you, Mayor.
Next up is Joe, and as a reminder, please state your name and affiliation, if you would.
Hey, Mayor Bottoms, Joe Henke with 11 Alive here. Sorry about the delay. My computer is reconnecting there. I had a couple APD questions I was hoping you could help out with. The first one, can you give us a status update on the search or hiring process for a new permanent chief of police? I don't know if you can discuss it. We had heard some rumors possibly of Dallas, Texas's former police chief, Renee Hall, who previously left the city of Dallas, being considered here in Atlanta. And the second question, with the headlines coming out of 28 police officers resigning last month, that's well above the monthly average from 2019. Can you talk about the loss of institutional knowledge at APD? And also, if you see a morale problem there still, what needs to be done to overcome that so officers don't continue to resign at the rate they did last month?
So thank you for the question, Joe. So I'll begin by speaking on the police search and talking with the professionals who conduct police, who do national searches for police chiefs. We've been told that this is probably the most inopportune time to conduct a national search because so many cities are in flux right now and conducting their own searches. What we have been advised to do is to provide the resources that our interim chief needs to make sure that he's able to do what he needs to do at APD. And then this allows us to do a couple of things. It allows us to evaluate interim Chief Bryant to determine if he's the one that we want to continue with as our permanent police chief. But it also gives an opportunity for us to put in the resources and all of the things we know that we need to transform our police department. What I've been told is that you can always start a search later. You can start a search at any time, but for us to really have an opportunity to evaluate, to engage in a productive police search, that this would not be the best time to do that. So I haven't heard anything about the former Dallas police chief. I don't know anything about that. But right now we are giving Chief Bryant the resources he needs, and taking this opportunity to make sure that APD as a whole has what it needs during this transformation. And as you all know, we received the feedback from the advisory committee. Part of that entailed getting community feedback as well, also getting feedback from APD, from the rank and file of APD, to help us with this transformation of APD. And the next phase of that is to engage the experts to help us make sure that this work is appropriately implemented. In terms of the resignations, we have seen a higher than normal resignation rate in APD, but I can also tell you Atlanta is not alone. Cities across the country are seeing people leave public safety. If you recall, we were having a significant number of people leave APD before I instituted the historic 30% pay raise. So we were able to really stabilize APD, but given where we are with all that's happened with policing over the past few months, we have seen a higher than normal rate of people retiring, but we are also seeing that across the country. But if history is any guide for us, what's happened in the past, people will leave APD, and then there will be a number of those people who will attempt to come back at some point. That's happened in the past, so we'll see if that happens now. As it relates to the institutional knowledge, that's always a concern, but what I know is that good organizations, there's a difference between good and great organizations. Good organizations are built on personalities. Great organizations are built on the ability to survive change. And part of the reason that we wanted Chief Bryant as our interim chief was that Chief Bryant has 30 years plus experience in APD. He knows APD, and there are a number of people who are still a part of APD who know APD and who know our city and want to continue to be a part of our police force. So this is a tough time for public safety across the country. Atlanta's not alone. I'm not going to sugarcoat that, but we've faced tough times before. We've faced challenges before, and we've been able to get to the other side of it. And I know we'll get to the other side of this as well. As it relates to morale, what I've been told is that morale is stabilizing within APD. But again, this is something that we are seeing across the country, that officers across the country are reporting low morale. And I know that Interim Chief Bryant, I believe, is on the call. So I'll let him jump in and just speak a little more to that if there's something I didn't touch on, Chief Bryant.
Good morning, Mayor, and thanks for the question. As the Mayor stated, what we're seeing as it relates to morale is very consistent in what we're seeing throughout the country. I've had a number of conversations with a number of chiefs. I just received information today from PERF requesting how we can improve morale, not just in Atlanta Police Department, but throughout. In our day-to-day operation, it is a requirement of our command staff to get out and have conversations with our line As we've moved from the level of where we were just 2 months ago, we are seeing those numbers stabilize. The conversation has changed when we're listening to officers. Are there still some concerns? Absolutely. We won't as the mayor stated, we won't minimize the concerns and the feelings of our officers. There are still some concerns. There are a number of them that are going to having conversations with EAP because they are very concerned on the state of where law enforcement and public safety is today. But those numbers are stabilizing. We see it in the number of resignation. We see it in the proactiveness of what is happening. We see it in the crime decreasing. So I think that we're on the mend of getting better, but there's still a way to go. So that's where we are. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Chief.
All right, Michelle. And as a reminder, feel free to turn on your camera when you're asking your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, this is Michelle Wright. I'm from WSB Radio, and I've got two questions just to get a little clarification on. The first is, if all is going well, going into phase 3 on the 24th, what does phase 3 look like for the city? And then on the census, the 30th is just 2 weeks from today. If things don't work out with the lawsuit, what are you hoping folks do in these next 2 weeks?
So I am flipping. I went through and looked at phase 3 myself yesterday. So I'm flipping through my notes to see what I wrote down on phase 3. You can find more information on that, Michelle, at atlstrong.org. But it is just further releasing or lifting of restrictions. And I'm sorry, I can't read my own handwriting here. But it's further lifting of restrictions. But if you go to atlstrong.org, then you can get additional information on phase 3. And I believe there are 5 phases total, with phase 5 being reopening of city buildings, etc. But I'll just direct you to that website so that I don't misspeak on that. And I'm sorry, I think your other question was related to the lawsuit. We're going to keep pushing. We are hoping that the lawsuit will be successful, but we are going to assume that we have a September 30th deadline. We're working very closely with Bloomberg Philanthropies to help us with our census work. We're bringing in volunteers. I want to thank those volunteers. We've also had an opportunity to move some employees around in the city of Atlanta whose jobs have changed a bit during COVID-19. We're putting people out in the field. We already had people out in the field, but you're going to see even more people out in the field. And so we're making a significant push to make sure that our numbers are where they need to be by September 30th. We're going to assume that the lawsuit will not be successful, and we have a 30th deadline. And anything after that, we're going to take it and be grateful for it. But we're going to push like September 30th is the drop dead date.
Great, thank you.
Maynard?
And I'm sorry, let me just add one thing on the biggest change I see in my notes here, that the city in phase 3 will begin to accept event permits and small public gatherings that are currently limited to 10 people. That number will be expanded as well.
Maynard?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning, Mayor. This is Maynard. How are you?
Good morning, Maynard.
I just want to ask about another issue this with regard to voting. some 100, according to ACLU, some 198,000 Georgia voters have been illegally purged by the Georgia Secretary of State. Is that concerning you? What's going on with the lack of voting opportunities for low income and poor folks in Atlanta?
It's always concerning when voters are purged. I know that sometimes it's necessary to look at the voter files and make sure that people who are deceased or people who have moved, et cetera, that the files reflect who our voters are. But that being said, it's extremely concerning when people who have a right to vote, when those names are removed from the files inappropriately. And I've shared publicly before, my cousin showed up to vote, and he showed up at the precinct and he's voted in for the past 30 years. He showed up and was told that his name had been removed, and he was told that essentially reflected that he had been convicted of a felony, which was completely inaccurate. Those are the type stories that concern me. And when things like that are happening with people who are showing up, and then you have the Secretary of State saying that he's going to prosecute 1,000 people for illegally voting, I certainly hope that those cases are looked at on a case-by-case basis, because I am going to assume that there are going to be a number of people who weren't sure that their absentee ballot would be accepted and counted in time. And I have personally seen from a friend of mine where she went in to look at her absentee record online, and the website reflected September 18th as having received the ballot, or something that was completely inaccurate for a date in the future. So while they're focusing on these prosecutions, I hope they're also focusing on making sure that we have a safe and fair election. I personally think that's where the resources should be put, because there's so many people who have a right to vote and who are being denied that right to vote. And to then instill further fear in people by saying I'm going to prosecute you is not going to do anything more than scare people away from voting. So I just hope that the Secretary of State will take his responsibility seriously and work with our county election offices across the state and make sure that they have the resources that they need to make sure that we're able to hold a fair election in a few weeks.
Is this deliberate political repression, political persecution of the voting process, you think?
I'll let you answer that.
Thank you.
All right.
Roxanne?
Unmute. Hi, sorry. I'm Roxanne Scott with WABE News. I hope your husband is feeling as well as he can. And I have another question about the census. I wanted to know more about the city's work with the group advocacy data, which is identifying undercounted census tracts in the city. I wanted to know where those undercounted census tracts are, and if you've seen some success with any people curious or responding to the census.
So thank you for asking, or thank you for your well wishes for my husband, Roxanne. And I'll just say this about my husband. His response has been, people died. So comparatively speaking, I'm fine. But it's just this reminder that there are lingering effects related to COVID-19. And also a reminder, I was talking with Reverend Alexander over at Antioch North, who was telling me he was holding a higher than amount of funerals in his church. And I said, is it because people are dying of COVID-19? And he said, no. He said, people aren't going to the doctor for other things, and they're dying of those things. So what I reminded my husband, and I'll just remind the public, we make assumptions about COVID-19, but there could be any number of other things that are happening with people across our city and across our country that people need to be mindful and tending to their health and taking all of these things very seriously. With my husband is lingering migraines and sudden onset of fatigue. And we've heard the other complaints from so many other people. So back to the census, as it relates to the census, we're working with a number of groups to help identify, including our local census office, who's been a great support to us, to make sure we're able to identify the low performing tracts. The unfortunate part, we can't drill down on information. So I don't know, for example, if you haven't performed, Roxanne, but I do know if your tract is low performing. And so we're redirecting resources in that way to specific tracts, and then trying to catch people and get people to respond. So again, you're going to get robocalls. You may be seeing Facebook ads. You may see someone standing outside of a grocery store. We're doing all of these things, and we'll ask you right then and there if you have responded to the census, and then we will have an iPad ready to hand to you if you want to take that opportunity to fill out the census at that time. But again, people are very eager to respond. They aren't saying they don't want to respond, but for whatever reason, they just haven't taken the time to do so.
Thank you.
There are no more raised hands.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And as always, please share your feedback with us. It's helpful, and hopefully we will continue to make things go a bit more smoother as it relates to these updates. I hope that you all have a good day. Please stay safe, be mindful of the weather that's expected to come through our city. I believe we are expecting to get hardest hit around Thursday or so with flash floods and some other inclement weather. So make sure you have your batteries in your flashlight, and your phones are charged up, and you have all that you need in case we have sustained power outages. And candles, don't use the candles. I told you I had a fire on my desk while filling out my census form, waving around some papers. So stay away from the candles. All right, thank you.